after colonialism, the philosophy of life and education, because that's very important, that was imposed on Africa was a type of philosophy that actually decontextualized African ways of learning. It therefore was counter-development. It was against development and well-being. It was a deculturing school and learning system. Therefore, it was counter-development and counter-well-being. It actually dislocated African ways of knowing and relating to the social and the cosmological environments that surrounded us. Therefore, it was a philosophy that was against development and against well-being. In Ngugi wa Thiong'o's terms, Ngugi wa Thiong'o is a Kenyan writer. His books include Moving in the Center, We've Not Child, Grain of Wheat, Decolonizing the Mind, and the Memory of Africa. He spoke about how actually what he called the killing of African cultures led to the killing of African language, what he calls linguicide, or the killing of language. When you lose the capacity to express your world in your own language, as Frantz Fanon wrote, you lose the world that you are talking about or expressing. It's no longer your world. It belongs actually to the person in whose language that world is expressed. With those and other liabilities that has taken place, therefore, lately we also have, and I will touch this very briefly, lately we also have what we call in academia, and most people here understand this probably more than me, postmodern thinking or post-structuralist thinking, which talks about some people in the world, some academics in universities like myself, who say, okay, we need to redefine the world, not necessarily in modernity and otherwise, i.e. enlightenment, the developed world vis-a-vis the underdeveloped world. They say we actually need to define it in a postmodern, post-structuralist structure, which simply means actually that we need actually to recognize all systems of knowledge and all ways of knowing as important and viable for people's lives. Well, that's good, but again, actually, that theory itself takes away, for example, the credit for that achievement as being given to French thinkers. People like, I will just name some names, not that they are important, but they have written stuff. The people like Michel Foucault and Jacques Derrida and a few others. What we actually now are finding is that actually the postmodern thought, i.e. the challenge to the dominant systems of knowledge, the challenge to the dominant systems of knowledge, did not actually come from France in the last 40 or 60 years. It actually came from Africa. It came actually from Africa. And when people, like for example, Kwame Nkrumah, Hamidou Kane, Cheikh Anta Diop, John Jackson, others from the Caribbean like Ivan Van Sertima, were writing about these topics. It was not being discussed in Europe. But suddenly, what happens is that there is the assumption, the problematic assumption, that all knowledges come from the European center or the European metropolis. But factually, we need to understand that that counter-dominant system, or the system of thought that's now challenging the dominant systems of the world, has been actually started and developed by African thinkers in a number of books. Sheikh Hamidou Kane in 1963 spoke about how actually the worst thing that has happened to Africa was not the military domination, but was the mental domination. Okay? Because if somebody dominates you physically or beats you up, whatever, by the time they leave, after a couple of hours you will recover. You're going to be fine. The scars will heal, you move forward. But if you are mentally dominated, and it is subconsciously imprinted in your mind, you're going to carry that with you for a long time. In fact, people in my own writing and in others, like Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who I mentioned it, Chinua Achebe, in his book, Home and Exile, and Things Fall Apart, and in other contexts, mental domination becomes what? Intergenerational. That actually children inherit the mental domination of their parents. We have seen that in Canada now, among the native populations, the Aboriginal populations. And it takes so much time to recover from the mental domination, and actually, one is again regain the confidence that was lost in your identity, in your history, in your culture, in your philosophy, in your self-esteem, in your self-efficacy, and in your capacity to develop and achieve. It's with that, and with that understanding, that we desperately need, in my opinion, new constructions of the philosophical, historical, and cultural platforms of the African people. To achieve that, we have to work collectively. Myself at the university, Professor Boblanco at the university, now creating the African History Library, and all of you who have other capacities in this area, of according or giving an important space to the world views and the understanding of life that emanate from people of Africa. Because there is so much wealth there that has been marginalized over a long period of time. We need to appreciate the relative Africanization of knowledge and education systems. When I say relative Africanization of knowledge, I could have said Africanization of knowledge without qualifying it. But I don't subscribe to that 100% because I believe knowledge is neither African totally, nor Asian, nor European, nor American. Knowledge is a collective human achievement. All of us have added something to knowledge. That becomes extremely important. For example, when he was talking about Mansa Musa in Mali 600 years ago, at that time, that achievement was unique in the world. Ivan van Sertima talks about how about 2,000 years ago, African astronomers were mapping the galaxy. John Jackson, in his book, Introduction to African Civilizations, definitively talks about how the use of iron was first developed in Africa. Now, look at that. The use of iron, is one of the most important achievements and breakthroughs in human civilizations. Without it, we wouldn't be here, we would not have come today here, we would not have done anything. It was done the first time in Africa, but nobody talks about it because you don't give the credit where credit is due, and therefore through that you create problems for people. By doing that, we can therefore recreate the philosophical and linguistic terrains of the African person. And actually, what is more, that can be harnessed and it can be developed and it can be given more space and credit. Through that, we also need to appreciate the rich and inclusive, communal, not individual, ways of African living, learning, and development. And that's, I think, also important. That gives us another opportunity to appreciate and welcome African thought systems and ways of knowing, where actually we see the world as multiverse, multi-centric, that there are different ways of knowing and there are different centuries in the world, that there isn't one century, that there are different centuries in the world, and that's extremely important. That can actually, therefore, enhance our understanding and relationship with a full and effective ecological, cultural, and historical well-being. And we need to listen, for example, to the writings and the wisdom of people like Julius Nyerere, Tanzania's first post-colonial president, and a well-known statesman who actually wrote many books, but has probably more than anything else, he spoke about the need for what he called, that word is very important, relevant philosophies, education, and developments for Africa. As he said, we cannot live on others' ways of thinking, but we need to create our own philosophies and ways of knowing. By doing that, therefore, we can see the emergence of new theories of knowledge. Okay? We can understand the reality of knowledge being contextual and socially constructed. That therefore Africans actually have constructed the knowledge they needed to effectively live in their environments. And actually they did not need to get another knowledge that was relevant for the living or for the living environment of others. And it's through that the community, the African community, and others, because we can talk about a collective community, which is the way Africans view the world, we can rescind or minimize the negative outcome of the processes of de-historicization or taking history away, and create more effective and lively-wise functioning ontological possibilities or ways of being. To achieve that, therefore, we need to talk about what we call traditional indigenous philosophies of education in the African context. These indigenous philosophies of thinking and life were there before the arrival of colonialism, and they will be here after the end of colonialism or the problems of the non-viable post-colonial contexts. It's via that, therefore, we can see new formations of philosophy. The work of, as I mentioned, Eze, Uradu, Mwanga, Nyerere, and others becomes very important. Attached to that is therefore our appreciation for all of us. I am not actually calling for a separate, detached African ways of doing the world. I'm talking about creating a world system where the African contributions, African understandings, and African achievements have to be recognized. And therefore, collectively, Africans, others, we can actually move forward as a collective, non-oppressive, non-dominating, non-subjugating human collective that can achieve something that's good for all. And according to Julius Nyerere, to achieve that, we need to share the meanings of life and what we mean by the meanings that we create in our contexts and in the contexts we will be creating in the future. Thank you.